Providing content to other people within our institution. As I said, this is the thing that we have the most experience in. We have been doing this for many years. When we made the switch from providing access to print materials to providing access to digital materials, we also made the switch from buying materials to leasing materials. And once we made that kind of like switch, we are no longer buying content, we are just having that content as a limited use provision. And that all falls under contract law. So you're really kind of like not dealing so much with copyright. Once you sign a contract with a vendor to use their database, any type of provision that you would have under copyright law is gone because you agreed to special contractual agreements. So let's say, for example, you have a database in political science, for example, and or international affairs. And one of the things that you have in that database are some primary sources. Let's say you have somebody who's researching the Armenian genocide. And some of the things in the database would include the letters that were written by Henry Morgenthau when he was ambassador to Turkey during World War I. And he sent the State Department's letters and telegrams and all these kind of things, and you would want to use these. These are actually in the public domain. They are government publications. They were written when he was ambassador of the U.S. For the most part, under the contract that you signed with the vendor, you cannot use these, even though this falls under public domain. Under the terms of your agreement, you're bound by the limitations that the vendor put on you. So you cannot cite these letters in your work or put them on your website or make them publicly available or redistribute them or reprint them or do anything else that you want to do. So that's just one example. Out of this comes another example that I don't know if any of you have encountered, but because I kind of like deal with a lot of government documents, I see this more and more. You come to, okay, so you see this and you know enough about copyright to know that you can't use these letters without violating the terms of the contract, but you know this is in the public domain. Let me find another version of this that is not within this database, and I will use that. This is like, World War I. It may not necessarily be digitized, but let's say you're fortunate enough and you did find the digitized version. Now you're coming into this area of version control. And if any of you have ever encountered the same content from multiple sources, version control becomes a nightmare. It becomes a nightmare in terms of what is the authoritative version, which is the one that you cite, which is the one that you refer your reader to. Having another version of whatever it is that you're looking for, it solves one problem, but it creates many other problems as well. Another problem that you come into when you're leasing content is one of, let's say you need to purchase an individual article. You have a faculty member who wants an article, and you do not have access to that article in your databases. You decide to just spend $20, buy the article, send it to the person. Pretty straightforward, pretty simple. But then it can get complicated. So a week later, you have somebody else contact you, and they want the same article, and you have the PDF that you sent a week ago to someone else. Can you take that same article that you paid money for and send it to another faculty person? Usually under the terms of your contract, no. Let's even a simpler case. Suppose the same faculty member, the first one that you bought the article for, got the article and lost it. They lost their laptop or whatever, and they want the same article again, the one that you just got them a week ago. Can you take that and send the same article to the same person a week or two later? A lot of this will depend on the terms of your contract, but there is also somewhere where you can exercise some sort of common sense rule to these things. Another example that I just ran into recently, and I don't know how many of you have seen this. If you work in libraries, you may have seen this also. All of this is contract, and all of this becomes becomes increasingly complicated. This is from like about a week, no, maybe, I don't know, I lose track of time. Sometime within the last 3 weeks, let's say. OCLC is signing agreements with EBSCO, with Wilson, with NetLibrary. It's OCLC's first search, which is their article provision wing. And they are changing their leasing agreement for people who previously got everything from first search. They will now be hosted on different platforms, EBSCO, Wilson being some of them. Each one of these has like a link with a long contract with long terms of use, which change the original agreements that you had originally had with this first contact provider. You have to be on top of these things, you have to read these things constantly, and then you have to sort of like, make sure that you understand what it is that you say. One of the things to remember with the contract is kind of like, it's a negotiation. So just because the vendor says that from now on this is so, doesn't necessarily mean that this needs to be so. There are certainly conditions in which you can be in touch with your content provider, with your vendor, and try to understand and negotiate different terms of use that will make more sense for your particular library. A second area that you will be encountering is you as creators of content. And here, what you will mostly be encountering are issues that have to do with fair use, with works for hires, as well as sometimes author addendums to particular publications. So what are some examples of how may you encounter this? Your institution wants to create an institutional repository, and you have decided that the institutional repository will be for thesis and dissertations written by students, as well as faculty, let's say pre-publications. Now, you're not running into this blindly. You have researched this. You are fortunate to work for an institution that has an intellectual property policy, and you kind of like know the rules, and your institution says that any work that is created by students as part of the requirements for their coursework is the intellectual property of your institution. So you are within your rights to take that work and take that dissertation or thesis and put it on your institutional repository. It sounds pretty simple, but then it, of course, gets complicated. So let's say you have a student who part of their research was actually funded. It was not funded by a federal grant, it was funded by a private grant. And that private grant that lent the lab equipment or whatever it is to that student to do their dissertations, they signed certain rights with their students as well, with that student as well. And they have certain rights to this dissertation, and you need to consider that. So that's one level of complication. You could also have even a more simple case. You have a student who wrote their dissertation in an area of, let's say, literary studies. And they decided to do some scholarly edition of, James Joyce or something like that. So they took like the letters of the early years of James Joyce, and well, James Joyce may not actually be the best example. Let's say somebody who's less possessive about their estate, Arthur Smith. So they have taken and they have analyzed that, and that is their dissertation. But now the estate of the author also has rights, and as long as it's a dissertation that is not published, nobody really cares, and it could fall under fair use, and it's not a problem. But if your institutional repository is not password protected and it is open for the whole world to view, then there are copyright issues that are involved. And let's not kid ourselves, we do this all the time. I mean, I certainly had something just a few weeks ago where I was interested in a certain book, and I went and I saw that the book cost $135. It's a pretty obscure topic by I think it was Springer. So I looked again and I said, well, this was probably based on a dissertation. I know enough. So I went in to see where this person wrote her dissertation, and then I went to that place and I went to see if they have her dissertation in their institutional repository, and sure enough, there it is. So I used that, but I can't cite that because it's an unpublished dissertation. So what am I going to do now?